And so I'm really excited about this next speaker because she is I would say the leading mind on making work visible and how to measure organizations properly, because that's important. Metrics can be used improperly as well. She is the author of Making Work Visible. I love her catchphrase, more know, less whip. So everybody give it up for Dominica DeGrandis. And she is also the senior flow advisor at PlanView, which recently acquired TaskTop. So thank you so much.
Thank you. The Uniform Code of Military Justice specifies court-martial for any officer who sends a soldier into battle without a weapon. There ought to be a similar protection for managers and directors because they shouldn't be made responsible for rolling out an initiative or a transformation or a mission without being set up to successfully effect change. That's because change is inevitable, and we need it to go in the right direction, and we need to do that rapidly. Time is of the essence here. Isaac Newton says so. We can't operate the same way forever. And how success in changing how organizations build and deliver value, in my opinion, will be determined by three things. And those three things are making work visible, measuring what matters, and setting up people for change, a coalition of the willing. Making work visible because that exposes the landscape, exposes the value stream so people can see how and what work delivers value. Number two is metrics. This is going to help you see and show why change is necessary so people can understand the impacts based on the data. And three, coalition of the willing. So there's a large enough group of people who actually want to change. It's not a one-person job. Right? No matter how competent they are, we need a group of early adopters to help communicate and to guide change. So today I'm going to show you a few ideas for how to make work visible, how to measure what matters, so your ideas can be valued and accepted, which can go far in helping you build a coalition of the willing. So let's jump in. Making work visible is it's the most fundamental thing you can do to improve workflow, right? Because the human brain is designed to find meaningful patterns and structures in what is perceived through vision, right? Most people, sighted people, process information based on vision. Right? If the right hemisphere isn't engaged and activated, then for visual learners, attention is going to be poor. And it's why meetings are more compelling for 2/3 of your team if there's something interesting to look at. Like this, like these. I like to start making work visible by looking at demand, looking at your work item types, right? What kind of work do you do? And then follow that up with a value stream canvas. Why? Why demand? Why work item types? Because they drive conversations on prioritization. They can, for organizations who have a lot of conflicting priorities, being able to bring prioritization front and center is really useful. You know, should we prioritize features or should we prioritize technical debt or security? And if the answer to that question is yes, you know, do it all and do it all now. People can only do so much at one time. In 2018, Mick Kirsten prescribed 4 work item types in his book, Project to Product, in use for software delivery: features, defects, risks. Risks are really security, compliance, vulnerabilities, that kind of thing, and technical debt. And these 4 work item types are used by a lot of really large organizations now who are moving from project to product. And it's very cool because they allow for, at a single glance, you can look at your work and see what the demand is. You can see the ratio of features over defects versus risks and debt. Like in this example here, if you had just delivered this work and you had delivered 50% of your demand was features, 10% defects, 20% risk, 20% technical debt. So we call that flow distribution because it's a distribution of the work that you're doing. This is a real example from real data. Over the last 30 days, some teams I've been working with, 55% of their work is production defects. 55%. That's probably going to provoke a necessary conversation. Now, I don't know if that's good or bad. Maybe that was their strategy. We need to knock off all these defects that we have right now. But maybe it wasn't part of their strategy. Maybe their strategy was to do 50% feature work and only 10% defects. So it prompts this conversation on what should our strategy be? What do we want it to be? Another example here, this one we got 43% features, 32% technical debt. So looking at your flow distribution, like every month or maybe every quarter, you can compare what you thought, what you had planned for it to be, and what it actually turned out to be. And that will give you some insights on some of the changes that need to be made. If you've got some existing review sessions, maybe some ops reviews that you do on a monthly basis or maybe a quarterly basis, I recommend just taking some of that time to look at your flow distribution. So you don't have to add it. You don't have to add another meeting to other people's calendars, right? If you have an existing review meeting, just take a few minutes and look at your flow distribution. Flow distribution, it's really a measure of trade-offs. If 100% of your flow distribution is on features and defects, then there's no capacity to work on security or debt items, right? There's not 120%. It only adds up to 100%. You can use the same concept for your work in progress. So flow distribution typically is for work that's been completed. It's already been delivered, it's done. But for work in progress that you're currently working on, you can visualize those and you can use work in progress limits to allocate capacity. And that's what this image this drawing is trying to show, that WIP limits are allocated per work item type. So here, the WIP limit, there's 14, this team can do 14 things at a time. And they can have 5 feature items in progress, 5 defects, 1 risk, and 3 debt. And you can have them anywhere in any state on your board as long as it's in progress. But in this situation, if you can see that only features and defects are getting delivered. The risk work and the debt work appears to be neglected. Right? And if you continue to just work on features, then you can't expect that it won't take away from other work. And this is what business and technology leadership need to understand. Need to understand these trade-offs. Once demand and work item types are defined, then I like to do a value stream canvas exercise. I got my definition of value stream there. All the activities done from beginning to end for product or service to deliver value to your customer, whether it's internal customer, external customer. I want to point out that value streams are made up of people. Value streams are really people. And everyone should understand their role in that end-to-end value stream, even if no one truly understands everything that goes on. Due to all the different teams and dependencies involved, people need to see where they fit in and what their contributions do to that value that gets delivered. So the value stream canvas exercise, it's an exercise to see how work arrives, how it weaves through the value stream across in usually a nonlinear fashion. They're like a visual language, so you can begin to see the relationships between visible work, invisible work, the tools that are in use, and how the handoffs occur. It's an exercise that enables discussion on a lot of complex and messy details that aren't always documented in a process flow or a traditional value stream map. And my observations are that it really helps teams see the problems because we're making them quite visible. It prompts valuable discussions to affect change. And here's a real example of a fintech infrastructure team attempting to upgrade its network capacity expansion. Value stream canvases, you can do them either from a starting point with an issue in production, or you can do them from the front end of a feature request. Either way, you're just going to sketch out what actually happened, a real incident. So in this case, there's an outage because their network, their circuits blew up, network outage. So originally, they created an incident, and pager duty goes out. We've got, for each Post-it note in there, we've got the activity that happened, we've got the tool that it happened in, how did they find out about it? Was it through Twitter? Was it, some people have no idea how work arrives. So identifying how does your work arrive, that's the starting point here. They were able to remediate this issue quite rapidly, but then the long-term fix was to upgrade their circuits from 5 to 10 gigabyte circuit upgrade. So then they created a change, and then they had to have a meeting, and there was a lot of meeting notes that got put in Word. Then they entered an epic into Jira board number 1, and that split into parallel processes with emails and meetings to different impacted teams. The circuit team needed finance approvals for circuit orders, so there were invoices and inventory records, and all of that had to be updated, and there were more meetings and more emails, and so then stories got created to do that work on Jira board number 2, and it just got really messy very fast. And so you can imagine a large room with about 20 people in it. VP of Ops was there too, and people are saying, no, they're arguing, no, that doesn't happen because we had to do X first, and then this happened. And at some point, people didn't really know what happened next, so they, on one of the Post-its, they just wrote goo. There's a bunch of goo that happens. We don't even fully understand it. Eventually, though, the change order gets validated, and then the authorization and peer review, and then it goes to change approval board. How long do you think it took to get 10 gigabyte circuits? 6 months, yeah. So VP of Ops is in the room. I watched jaw drop in disbelief at how long it took to do that, largely because of the budgeting process, the finance and approvals. This exercise, the outcomes of this exercise were used to improve and speed up the procurement process. So it's there's many ways to reflect and learn, and for a value stream canvas exercise, you can use this not just to make work visible, but you can use it to do retros and reflections, for something like Log4j. It'd be quite an interesting one. And I'm leaving you with some questions that you can ask, whether you're doing one for production or whether you're doing one for a feature request. Let's move on to measures that matter. So 3 fundamental flow metrics. Fundamental, that's WIP, that's your work in progress. We call that flow load. It's the load on the teams. Your speed metrics, sometimes referred to as lead time, we call it flow time, the point when you decided to do something to when it was available for your customer to use. And then throughput, which we call flow velocity, because all of our measures in the flow framework have to start with flow. So start with WIP, start with work in progress, what we call flow load. Why? Because it's almost impossible to successfully effect change with your team who's cognitively overloaded, right? There's just not enough space or time to think, to do something new on top of your day job, right? You have to have some slack time to learn learn new things. I'm currently working with this one large retail, about 100 teams. And last week, I was working with the infrastructure team, networking team. I work with a lot of IT ops. My background, most of my career was doing configuration management, build management, source code control, and release management. So I end up relating to sort of the folks in the trenches doing that kind of work. So this team, their flow load, they've got about 13 people on their team. They've got 117 things they're juggling at the same time. That's about, on average, about 9 per person on the team. So I asked them, how do you juggle 9 things at a time? Like, how do you do that? And it turns out they don't really. They just set work aside, and it sits idle. This is why they go off and work on the other things. So 40% of their WIP is sitting idle. It's not actively being worked on. So this graph here, we're looking at features, defects, risks, and debt. Features are green, feature type work. And I'm using the word feature, but it's really intended in our industry anyway to be, and I work a lot with, huge corporations around finance and health and banking and auto industry and retail. And so when we talk about features, those might be epics, those might be features, they might be stories, they could just be tasks. And it depends on what level you want to measure in your context so you can improve your decisions. And so when we just look at their feature work, the dark shaded green shows work that's in an active state. Light shaded green is showing work that's in a wait state. So you can see, last week, their flow load was 62 features. 37 of them were in a work state, 25 of them were in a wait state, right? Because they're supporting new data center build-outs and they get interrupted and sucked into development projects, doing things like firewall changes. So they get pulled away from their planned work into doing unplanned work. 50% of their demand is unplanned. And because unplanned work delays planned work, it's a real problem for them. So measuring their WIP, their flow load, and seeing how much of it is sitting idle is really powerful in prompting conversations on start finishing and stop starting. We say that a lot in our world, stop finishing work and stop starting new work, right? And why pulling new things into progress before finishing old work is problematic. So like many really large organizations that I work with, this started a discussion with that team on what their WIP limit should be. And the quick answer to that is just lower. 100 is better than 117. Just lower that WIP. Ideally, though, the WIP limit, which is an enabling constraint, it's an enabling constraint because it allows the team to say, hold on, wait a minute, we're full, we're totally full. We understand there might be expedites that come in, but when they do, what can we stop working on so we can deprioritize our work and take on something new? So ideally, the WIP limit is determined by the departure rate, which you need to factor throughput in, like how many items delivered over a period of time. That is the team's capacity. So there's a big clue there that you can look at to see what that is. So this was this team's throughput, their flow, what we call flow velocity. Over the last month, they delivered 56 things. Right? You can see the trend of their flow velocity is going down, coming into September. So let's look at their flow time. So flow time, when it comes to speed, a key decision that needs to be made is when do we start and stop the clock, which is often runs into heated debate on when the clock stops. Because for teams who are being measured on how long things take, they want the clock to stop sooner than when it would So there's different levels of work item types that you can look at. If you're dealing with epics, then the clock starts when the epics first starts getting worked on. Right? If you're dealing with features, if you want that view, then you start the clock when the feature starts and on down the line with stories. It just depends on your context and what your teams need. So configuring your flow time metrics is kind of necessary to capture the data that's important to you. This is a very common scenario in a lot of in most companies that our team works with at TaskTop, now PlanView. There's a real struggle to perform as well as they'd like to. We call this water scrum fall because the development team in the middle, they're agile and they're relatively fast. Right? It's on average, about 2 to 12% of the end-to-end value stream is done in development. But you have this large amount of work upstream. You hear 48% of the time it takes value to be built and delivered is spent upstream in planning and funding and prioritization and triage and all of that. And then same thing on the other end. Unless you're doing the DevOps thing and from your build, from checking in code to delivery, where things are pretty rapid, but we don't see that a lot. That's kind of rare. And so that's why we make it a point to measure end to end so that we can bring visibility upstream to finance and business leadership on how long it actually takes to get something to the point where you can actually write your first line of code. So to wrap up measures that matter, we'll talk a little bit about Little's Law. There's a relationship between flow load, WIP, and flow time, and it's called Little's Law. It's where the average flow time for time to market is calculated as a ratio between WIP and throughput. And the gist of it is that on average, the more things you're juggling, the longer your flow time is going to be. And it makes sense. You know when you're headed home and you get on the freeway and the freeway has too many cars on it, your commute's going to take longer. And so, and changing one metric will likely impact the others. So here's what you can do here. That's kind of fun because math is to calculate what your work probably ought to be. Right? So on this infrastructure team, you can see that their throughput is 24. That's for 30 days. So it's about 5 a week, about 1 a day. They're delivering about 1 thing a day, 1 feature a day. And their speed, their flow time, on average, these features, they're probably stories, are taking about 36 days to deliver. So if you plug those numbers into this equation, what should their WIP be? Anyone? Remember, you need to use the same units of measurement. That's why we don't do story points here, because they don't compute. Same units of measurement. Measurement here is days. So 36 days to deliver feature, and about 1 per week in flow velocity. So if you solve for WIP, what do you get? Who said 36? There you go. That's right. Now, 36 is kind of North Star, because Little's Law has all these assumptions that come with it. Like you need a stable system and other things. And so 36 is probably kind of high, but at least it's something to shoot for. Best case scenario. So we have time for some questions, and I'd like you to just put them in slido.com. So whip out your phone, bring up slido.com, and punch in 1039-118. 1039-118, slido.com.
Can I just get a simple question? What is technical debt?
Technical debt. We'll do that while people are prompting questions. Well, debt in itself is any investment in future capability, whether that's people, process, or tools. Technical debt is usually referred to improving, for example, improving your self-service capability. Yeah? Refactoring your architecture. It's an investment. Yeah. And experimentation is an investment. Training, coaching is an investment. Those are all part of debt. So, yeah, debt is technical debt, but it's also these other things that are going to help you improve your world. So Slido.com, 1039, 118. And I have one more book left, so we'll see. With Slido, you can also vote up other people's questions. So if we can bring the Slido up, look at the questions. Oh, you're here. Okay. Oh, okay. What is an effective way of convincing management to allow for the first steps to happen, i.e. lowering WIP limits, making room for quality? I think the first step is showing them the data at their kind of ops review or whatever meeting you have to look at the data. So I mentioned I was a build engineer, and for a long time, everybody complained that builds took too long. And I used to grumble that it wasn't really builds that took too long because we could compile quickly. It was the smoke. We didn't have automated testing. It took forever to do a manual smoke test. But my ranting got me nowhere. So it wasn't until at an ops review, I got up and I presented how long builds took and why that was. And it blew me away because I got headcount, and I got budget, but probably more importantly, I got empathy from the organization. So I think that just data gives you credibility where ranting doesn't. So I think showing the data is really useful. Oh, you mentioned measuring what matters, but didn't touch on OKRs, objectives, and key results. How do you connect the main mission measures? The KR in the OKR, the KR are the flow metrics. Those are the key results. And if you can align, not just for technology, but for operations, for leadership, be looking at the same key results through these metrics, then I think that's how you measure that, right? The flow metrics are the KRs. They might not be, if you're just measuring at the team level, then those will be at a team level key result. But you can measure up at the high level, right, at the portfolio level. How can we implement this at scale in a DoD organization where there is no alignment on value and culture? If there's no alignment on value and culture, I don't know that you can. But I think that, that's just a huge challenge, getting alignment when you've got 20 different VPs who each have their own thing, and they think it should be your number one priority, and you're trying to support 20 different VPs. We've found some success in finding one VP, or maybe in your world, it's one colonel or admiral who gets it, and working with their organization to do an experiment and have a win come out of that, and have that experiment be presented in front of the larger audience. And now that group becomes the cool group that people want to be part of. Right, in our world, that would be like, I want to be on that team that's up on the third floor now because they're doing cool stuff, and I want to do that. And so then people start wanting to move to that organization. And ideally, then things would sort of spread virally. But I recognize that that isn't always possible. Metrics are important for organizations, and I'm out of time, so this will probably be the last question. But I'll be around. I'm around today, so come find me. Metrics are important for organizations. Is the initiative driven by top leadership, midterms, mid-tier, or teams directly? Is the initiative, well, we need everybody. We need everybody. Everybody plays a role. Because if you just have the teams who are from the ground up trying to do it, but then they run into some mandates on how people should be measured, then that's not going to work. And if you just got leadership and they delegate it down to other teams to implement it, but those teams aren't set up for success, they don't have any authority, yet they're held accountable, that's not going to work. So, and then the poor middle managers who get stuck in the middle. I think we got a lot of hard work to do, and we need everybody to do it. All right, thank you.